So let's turn back to Elon Musk. Now that we've gotten here,
Our favorite person. Yeah.
oh right, naturally. So like he didn't even found Tesla, even though I think there was some lengthy legal battle that he had to undergo in order to call himself the founder of Tesla. But there was a really long period up until really recently where he was heralded as this savior of the planet, right? Electric cars were the thing of the future, and that was going to help combat climate change. Now, I am in favor of electric cars as a way to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, but talk a bit about the problematic nature of presenting that as a silver bullet to climate change. Although first, do you mind just taking us through the history of how Elon Musk and Tesla got onto the scene in general?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I would just start by agreeing with you that I think electric cars are going to be part of this transition, right? Part of addressing the climate contribution of the transportation system. What I say is more that it shouldn't be the only solution, right? It shouldn't be the thing that we're hoping is going to save us. And so, yeah, Elon Musk really kind of emerges as this guy who's going to save the planet because he buys himself into Tesla after they sell PayPal, him and Peter Thiel and the other people who are dealing with that. And one of the things he does with the money that he takes from PayPal is to invest in this company Tesla. And so Tesla already existed. There were already engineers who were working on it who had developed this battery technology and this idea for the company. And Elon Musk likes what they're doing. Elon Musk sees promise in this. He wants to be, someone who is associated with this kind of a project, and so he buys into it. And he, becomes one of the key people in the company because he's effectively bankrolling it, right? And so over time, there come to be feuds with the other folks at the company. And eventually they're pushed out and Elon Musk becomes the CEO. For a while, he does call himself the founder, as you say, and that has to be resolved in court because he's not the founder. And they eventually agree that he can call himself a co-founder, even though, he wasn't. But yeah, so, the idea behind Tesla is effectively that we're going to create a luxury electric car, this Tesla Roadster, that is going to bring in the money that we can use to create a more affordable electric car. And then we can use that money to make a more affordable electric car again. And that's the plan with it. It doesn't exactly work out as planned. These cars tend to run into more problems than they expect as they're creating them, in large part because Elon Musk has some demands about how they look and how they work that make them much more difficult to produce. And so, yeah, that creates some problems. There's a journalist, Edward Niedermeyer, who's looked into Tesla really closely, and he basically says that around 2014 there's an important shift that happens in the company where it goes from trying to promise the new electric car and the new car that it's going to make and to use that to raise money, to starting to make these really kind of out there predictions, right? That they're going to solve the self-driving technology and kind of implement that into the cars, or it's going to do all of these other kind of crazy projects, and to use those bold visions in order to raise more money off of the shareholders, to the degree that Elon Musk said recently that if they're not able to figure out full self-driving, Tesla is effectively worth zero, because it's become so much about like the hype and what's being built up that it's not so much about the electric cars anymore. And I think that's something that's important to recognize about Tesla. And so if we kind of zoom out and look at the broader picture of the electric car, as you were saying, I think that it does serve a role in the transition in addressing the climate contribution of the transportation system. But there's still a lot of problems with it if we are looking at it as the silver bullet, which it's not. And so I think it's really problematic then when people refer to it as a zero emissions vehicle just because it doesn't have the tailpipe emissions. These are still cars that are still on the road that still have all these other problems that we've been talking about. They just reduce the tailpipe emissions and reduce the total emissions to a certain degree. But the electric cars still have a much higher production emissions. And what that means is when it rolls off the production line and when you first start driving it, there's already, a higher amount of embedded emissions in the car because the real savings comes from driving it. The longer you drive it, the more kind of climate benefit that you get after a certain period, you'll overtake the fossil fuel vehicle. And so if you just have a luxury electric car that you're not actually driving very much, that doesn't give you the climate benefit as if, someone replaces their Toyota Corolla or their Honda Civic with an electric car and is just driving it all the time, right? Um, but the other piece of that is the battery in the car requires a load of mining, like a ton of mining that needs to go into it. The International Energy Agency estimates that in order to build all of these batteries for these cars, if we're just going to pursue a policy of largely replacing fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles, that the amount of lithium we'll need is up to 4,200% more, and the amount of nickel and cobalt is over 2,000%. So there's a lot of extraction here. And the problem is that, we're telling ourselves that we're making this green transition to make the world a better place, which is very important, right? But if we're going to do that, are we going to continue these kind of neo-colonial relationships, these neo-imperialist relationships with these countries in the global south that will be doing a lot of this extraction? Or should we think much more fundamentally about the transportation system and the larger kind of systems of society that we've set up to ensure that we're doing more to kind of create a better world instead of just trying to reduce the emissions impact that comes of it?
And you mentioned the self-driving car element. Let's talk about that because to me, it is. I'm reminded of the fantasy of lab-grown meat, which they can make certain little fleshy particles, but for the most part, that is a pipe dream in terms of one, how much it would cost to create lab-grown meat, and there needs to be muscle tissue that goes into it. I mean, it is not around the bend, but it does attract a lot of venture capital investment for that particular dream. For Elon Musk, it seems clear to me that he is inflating Tesla's stock price by dangling the carrot of the self-driving car, which is killing people on the roads as they test them, and does not seem to be as close as he makes it seem publicly for reasons that involve money. Is my perception accurate?
Yeah, I think your read is pretty spot on.
Okay, good.
I think, the real concerning thing with the self-driving car for me is we've had these promises for over a decade now, right? Google, Uber, Elon Musk have all been the key ones that have been promising us that these self-driving cars are coming. And as a result, it's going to kind of remake the transportation system, right? Because all of a sudden it's going to solve traffic congestion. All of a sudden it's going to solve the human deaths on the road because now these computers will be in charge instead of us dumb humans. And, it's going to be more efficient. So you'll solve the climate impact of the vehicles. You won't have to own a car anymore. So we solve that, all these supposed benefits that were going to come of it. And then the vehicles didn't arrive because it turned out that it was actually much more difficult to create these technologies. And so I think the key is that we've been distracted, right, for over a decade when we could have been taking these other measures to actually address the problems in the transportation system, whether it's around traffic or human deaths or the climate impact. But rather, we've kind of been stagnant, right? We could have been making huge investments in transit systems, in improving cycling infrastructure, in building communities that are more oriented around, walking and these transit-oriented kind of ways of life, I guess. But instead, we've said, okay, we can still have these cars and the tech industry will solve these problems with the cars, but then they never actually solve the problems. And so we're still just stuck in this system that I think more and more people are becoming, unhappy with, unfulfilled by, angry with even. And it doesn't work for us. It just works for these companies.
It is a fundamentally neoliberal fantasy that is about, we are going to be saved. We are going to be emancipated by the innovations of these brilliant tech billionaires and the market. And frankly, there's so many layers of lies that I think are involved in that, where, as you say, all of that energy should have been gone towards expanding rail, expanding public transportation, decades before, and there's a reason that our infrastructure is crumbling. That all could have gone towards that as opposed to inflating the ego of someone like Elon Musk or, looking to tech for that. And so I think, uh, I'm returning to the Theranos example. How all of those old guys like Henry Kissinger or what was it, George Shultz, how they all got duped by someone like her was because they belong to the religion. Jim Mattis, yes, they belong to the religion of neoliberalism, and this was like their ultimate savior, right? This kind of person who was going to revolutionize healthcare through the sheer will, genius, etc. And it seems like it's the same thing with climate change and plus transportation infrastructure when it comes to a guy like Elon Musk or Google with all this and the Apple car, which is coming around the bend. Um, but
Yeah,
none
I'm
of
not
the,
sure that Apple car is ever going to arrive.
right, right. I mean, none of that is going to solve this. None of that's going to solve this.
No, like, we've really lost the plot, right? In constantly hoping that these wealthy people in Silicon Valley are going to deliver the solutions to our problems. I think for me, one of the really instructive things and enlightening things about looking back at the history of automobility at, when the automobile emerges and how it becomes entrenched in the city is to see that it wasn't because this technology emerged on the scene, right? It wasn't because the automobile was invented and all of a sudden it took over. It was because the state acted in a way to ensure that the automobile, that the city was remade for the automobile effectively to force people to buy the automobile, to move out to the suburbs. And so then if we look at the challenges that we face today and what is actually going to be needed to address them, it's not just, these supposedly brilliant minds in Silicon Valley making these products that are supposed to change the world. Rather, the state always plays the essential role of at least laying the foundation for these changes that are necessary. It's not the technologies that make these changes, right? We can make policies that encourage the adoption of these technologies, but the technologies themselves do not solve the problems. It's the politics behind them and having a political framework in place that can enable these changes to take hold, that can enable the addressing of climate change and using these technologies in a way that does that in a way that's equitable for everyone. So if we think about what we need right now, especially when we think about the tech industry and how we're going to solve these huge problems like climate change, it's not just hoping that, there's going to be better climate technologies developed by people like Elon Musk or some new founder who emerges from the valley, but rather we need the government to really step up to the plate and do something serious to address these problems.